All right, a few more people have just joined. Thanks again for joining us tonight, UVM Extension Maple webinar series here. We are going to hang out for one more minute and get a few more attendees through the lobby, and then we'll start the program with Chris Lindgren. All right, everyone. Hello, this is Mark Canella, University of Vermont Extension. I'm really glad to have you with us tonight. We have this Maple webinar series that's been running for several weeks and still some more sessions to go. We've got Chris Lindgren here tonight. I'll introduce him in a moment. Looking forward to a terrific session on the business of SAP. Couple items on housekeeping before we get going. We have disabled everyone's camera and everyone's audio for the near term. The way we've run these programs is we'll give our presenter a chance to talk and start to present. Chris is going to offer a couple Q&A slots over the course of the hour, so there'll be at least 1 or 2 points within the session where I'll click a box that'll allow you to unmute yourself when Chris gets to questions, and if you want to speak out with a question, you'll have that option. You'll also have the option to use the chat bubble. If you're new to Microsoft Teams, you should have a top ribbon with controls, and there's a little bit of a cartoon bubble there for the chat box. You can click that and welcome you to type in questions at any point. I'll moderate questions either during the breaks or we'll save some for the end, depending on how the timing goes. I'd like to let you know that in that chat bubble, there is a closed captioning link. If any of you find that helpful, you can click that link. And we do have a closed captioner working behind the scenes that is typing out everything we say. That's an option in the chat bubble. And I always like to invite people. You're more than welcome to send a note. We don't have time in these groups to go through personal introductions, but if you want to send a note and say, hey, where you're from or anything about your business, we always welcome that, and it's always fun to see where people are, and mention your state as well. We've been getting people from all over the country and have folks from Ontario, Quebec, and other Canadian provinces as well. So I've covered closed captioning. Another point to mention, several of you have indicated that you'd like a certificate or you may be looking for certifications. We do have confirmation that we have credits available for this program if you're a member of the Society of American Foresters. We've got your email contacts, so a few weeks into the future, we'll be sending follow-up emails to attendees and just confirming the best ways to transfer certificates or records of your participation. I believe I've covered most of the housekeeping. Last thing, Chris will introduce himself. We do have the potential of some spotty connections with thunderstorms moving through the areas in Vermont right now. So if we have any interruptions, we're going to just do the best we can, and we'll go with the flow. Chris and I have a couple backup plans. So I'll stop there. I'm going to introduce Chris Lindgren. Chris is our Forest Business Coordinator with University of Vermont Extension. He runs a variety of programs doing business coaching with forest products owners, and Chris and I have worked closely on a number of our Maple economics projects over the past several years. Chris can tell you more about projects he's got himself, but tonight we're going to settle in, and Chris is going to present on the business of SAP. Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Mark. How's my sound? Still good?
Yep, you're coming through fine.
Okay. Let's see, I wanted to turn my video off to help with the bandwidth issues. So I'll do that now. Here's a slide with a couple of upcoming webinars. Next month or so, one on contracts and legal agreements, which is actually pretty relevant to what we're talking about tonight as well. And then something on maple forests and carbon on the 13th, and then Northeast forest land taxes and programs towards the end of October. And you can register for these at Maple Manager. So good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning in tonight. My name's Chris Lindgren. I work with UVM Extension, as Mark said, and I split my time between managing forest business program, working one-on-one with forest and wood products business owners to improve profitability, and working with Mark Canella and the Maple team on economic research and development projects. I started investigating SAP business economics about 15 years ago in Weston, Vermont, where I live, and I harvest sap from about 700 taps in 3 nearby sugar bushes. I'll be stopping a couple times along the way, as Mark mentioned during this presentation, to address questions. So please hold your questions or enter them into the chat box, and we can address them during these breaks. Today's presentation is going to share some of what we've learned about the business of sap. Sap selling has always been part of the industry, but little research that we're aware of has been done on economic viability or cost of production of the sap business. This work is a start, but surely not the end. As a matter of fact, this year we have several sap-only businesses enrolled in our Maple Business Benchmark project, and we're looking for some more. So contact me if you're interested in participating in cost of production and benchmarking work for sap businesses, or if you're a landowner interested in considering a sap business. We have some new programming coming up that you will be interested in. For this presentation, we have not specifically researched sap businesses. What we've done is mine and analyze existing data for sap businesses. We've worked with 50+ Maple businesses in the benchmark project and gleaned data from 21 sap-only business responses to the Northeast Producers Survey. This analysis indicates opportunity in sap businesses. As a producer said to me just last week, I think that sap is a viable business. This presentation will include a quick review to get us all on the same page, a taste of research on sap business and the cost of woods activities from the UVM Extension Maple team, and a look at planning tools and other useful resources for starting or running a maple sap business. We're going to end up looking at a couple of sap business models. So what is a sap business? In the Northeast Producer Survey, we identified these businesses as sap only. A sap business harvests maple sap from the forest and sells the sap or trades the sap for syrup. The sap business is the woods part of maple syrup production. Why, with 10,000 maple farms, do we need more sap businesses? Well, the big picture is sugaring is a driver of economic development, a growth industry for rural areas that provides jobs and supports keeping forests as forests. It's estimated that only 3% of maples are tapped. There is substantial growth potential here. On a personal level, why would you start or have a sap business? Some producers prefer to structure their businesses to gather and sell sap to maple syrup producers based on certain skills, lower investment requirements, efficiencies of specialization, focus on business-to-business relationships, preference for forests, amongst many factors. This why is a core question to business planning. We each have our own answer to this question. I got started because I had maple trees and I love being out in the woods doing something productive. Gathering and selling sap is a way to begin the investment and reinvestment growth cycle for a syrup business. Gathering and selling sap is the easiest and lowest cost way to get started in the maple business. Tonight, we'll be talking about identifying, establishing, and growing sap businesses. But first, a quick review of the relationship between sap and syrup and the methods for valuing or pricing sap. We all likely know that sap from the maple trees is collected and processed, dewatered via reverse osmosis and/or evaporation to produce maple syrup. Hence, the price of sap is directly connected to the price of syrup. And the bulk price of syrup is generally used to determine the value of sap. Currently, bulk prices in Vermont are up a bit from last year, ranging from about $2.10 to $2.40 per pound, which is an equivalent of $23, $27 per gallon. Sap varies in quality over the course of the season. Quality is also affected by freshness and sap handling and storage. Quality affects grade, which in turn impacts the value or price paid to the sap producer. The other values, or the other variables impacting sap value, is sweetness. Sweeter sap requires less energy inputs to concentrate. This makes sweeter sap worth more per gallon. 2.4% sap is worth more than 2% sap per gallon. Now we'll do a quick research review. Our survey work hints that there's underutilized processor capacity. Ask producers you know how much more sap they could process without adding new processing equipment. With 67% of processors using reverse osmosis, SAP handling and processing has increased at the company level. In part, this is driving expansion in the woods. For every buyer, there must be a seller. Our survey work reported 130 businesses buying SAP. This sample purchased over 2 million gallons of SAP annually, with the average producer buying 15,000 gallons of SAP and large business processing over 800,000 gallons of purchased SAP annually. This seemed to me to be a demand opportunity. As mentioned, we did not specifically research SAP business. We have mined the existing data for SAP business information. We have 4 SAP businesses in the benchmark project, and 7%, which is 21 responses to the Northeast survey, identified as SAP businesses. What did the survey say? The survey showed significant opportunity. And this slide shows that 95% of SAP businesses reported that they are sustainable or viable, where sustainable indicates a going concern despite weak profitability, and viability indicates a profitable business with the ability to operate profitably indefinitely. When comparing SAP businesses to integrated operations, which you see here on the left, SAP on the left and the integrated operations on the right, our survey data suggests that SAP businesses as industry participants are more profitable than combined syrup processing operations, with 55% of SAP businesses able to operate as viable, profitable businesses as compared to 25% of the integrated operations. And again, if you add together economic viability and sustainability, you have 95% of SAP businesses who are economically viable or sustainable, and closer to 85% of the integrated operations. So when I saw this information from the survey, I got pretty excited. So after that quick review, I just wanted to take a couple questions, Mark, if there was any questions that people wanted to give me live, or if there were any questions in the chat box.
Yeah, I'm gonna read them off right now, Chris. There's got one, and I'm gonna encourage folks to type in if you can, and I'll work on the mic. Chris, one question from Ross is the SAP program you mentioned at the beginning, is that available only to Vermont residents?
No, but it's going to be primarily initially for Vermont residents and then throughout the Northeast. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but definitely welcome anyone who's interested to follow up with me.
Great, and I'm not seeing anything else in the chat box, Chris. So I'll suggest you keep going, and I'll keep an eye on the chat box.
Okay. So if you're sold on the idea and you want to get into the SAP business, you need 2 things: SAP and buyers. And so starts your planning process. I encourage business planning. At maplemanager.org, there's numerous resources on business planning. Find and use the one-page plan, work your way through the online planning module. Research indicates that business planning increases chances of business success and profitability. Once you have your SAP sourced and you have buyers, you want to establish your business by opening up a checking account, setting up systems to track sales and expenses, and formalizing any lease agreements and/or purchase and sales arrangements. But I am getting ahead of myself. So first things first, we need to locate a sugar bush and secure access to maple trees. The place to start is with an assessment of your potential SAP source. Whether your land or your neighbor's lands, this tool was developed to aid prospective sappers in analyzing opportunity. Let's look briefly at this assessment tool. I'll also send information on this to everybody after this presentation. But let's click into here and make it a little bigger. So this 2-page assessment first looks at important attributes of a productive sugar bush. And then we're going to look at essential business planning considerations. And I developed this with some scoring criteria to help you rate the sugar bush that you might be looking to analyze. We've got 10 sugar bush attributes here that are important to assess when you're thinking about tapping out or leasing taps. First one, of course, is your tapping density. Here's our ranges, and you find tapping density by doing some sampling in your sugar bush. If it's small enough, you can walk through and count them. I've used a clicker in some of mine, smaller sugar bushes. I got 4 acres, and I walk through and count them with a clicker. Of course, that brings us to the next thing as to how many acres you have available. The amount of acres that you can potentially tap times the estimated number of taps per acre will give you your total potential taps for that sugar bush, which is going to be needed to feed into your assessment to look at profitability. These other attributes here are important when it comes to soils. Moving around in the sugar bush or developing roads, it matters the type of soils you have. You want to see what kind of sugar bush you have. There's not only the number of taps, but are they older trees that are on decline, or is it a younger sugar bush? You know, what's the health that you have there? Down here, we look at management. Is there significant work that needs to be done managing this sugar bush, stuff that needs to be trimmed out, encourage new growth. Access to your sugar bush as well as within your sugar bush is very important. And each one of these, you can give it a score of 1 to 3, looking at these various descriptions in these cells. And then another important thing to pay attention to is your estimated costs here. When it comes to, say you're looking at your tapping density, you might need to hire a forester, or you might do it yourself. You might want to consider how much time that's going to take you. Incorporate that into some of your startup costs. Other things it's important to pay attention to are availability of utilities. Are you going to be looking to put in vacuum pumps? Do you have electricity at the road? How far might you need to bring it in? Do you have a good site where you could put up a sap shack to house your tanks, your pumps? Are you going to have to pay a lot of money to bring electricity in? You can add those costs in. Grade of site is really important for moving around in the site, as well as for helping transport your sap. Which way does the grade flow? Does it flow towards the road or away from the road? Getting a sense of the management history in the sugar bush is important. The composition of your forests. You kind of aim for about 80% is the best practice these days, no more than 80% in sugar maples, in order to keep from having a monoculture. Keeps your forest much healthier and much more resilient. And then we start looking at the distance to your potential customers. So if you have a sugar bush, where are the sugar makers, the syrup makers who you're going to sell sap to? Are they far away? Are they close by? What kind of roads do you need to drive? I've got 2 different producers that I sell to. One of them is really close, but it's on a dirt road that gets really bad in the springtime. And sometimes it takes me longer to drive those 4 miles than it does the 12 miles down the paved road to the sugar producer that I sell to in the next town. Those are important things to consider. Finally, looking at expansion. We all dream of getting bigger when we start our sugaring operation. So how much expansion ability is there close by? So those are important sort of resource attributes to look at. And then it's important to couple that with business assessment. This is getting at what I was talking about with how close or far away potential buyers are. Where are the markets and what's the competition for sap? What kind of labor and management needs you're going to have? This will match up with how many taps do you have, how many acres, so how many people are you going to need? What are the experience of the folks you're working with? What's your experience, both in the sugar bush, but also, as importantly, what's your business knowledge and your business skills? And which of these areas might you need to get some education and improve your skills in? It's important to make sure you have a good record keeping system. When you're selling sap, it's important to keep track of all the sap that you're delivering and the sugar content. It's always good to start your business with an idea of what type of business entity you might want to be from the get-go rather than deciding later, as well as putting together a business strategy, simple mission, vision, goals here. Why are you in business? I alluded to that a little earlier. What's your thoughts of where you want your business to be in the future? And what are your more immediate goals as far as how many taps, how many acres? And then this leads to various metrics or business benchmarks. What's your target production rates? Production rates in the benchmark project that we're working on range from about a quart per tap, which would be around 10 gallons of sap per tap, up to over a half a gallon, which is 20 gallons. So looking at targets that you want to achieve and that are possible to achieve with your given resource. What's the forest diversity currently? What's a target goal for that diversity as you manage your forest? What other types of business metrics might you have? Profitability metrics, revenue amounts, wide variety of metrics like that. You want to get some of those sorted out. And then finally, although this is something to look at sooner, not last, is mapping and finding maps of the sugar bush. You want to make sure that the bush that you're assessing has well-defined boundaries, or at least that you know how to define them. To get started, when you're doing maybe a desktop analysis, sometimes you can find tax maps online or at town offices. If you are in Vermont, Vermont has the Vermont Agency of Natural Resource Atlas. Other states might have similar resources. There you can get a lot of information about your land. Tax maps, at least in Vermont, are notoriously inaccurate, so I wouldn't use them for boundaries specifically, but it can give you a sense of what the land you're looking at, the parcel size is. And eventually you're going to want to find surveys, and you're going to really want to find out where your boundaries are when you start to get serious about the sugar bush and laying out your lines. So I know that was kind of quick, but we'll send this out to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions on this as well. Okay, we were able to get back here pretty easily. Okay, so it's said that business is all about relationships, and it is. As a business owner, you manage employees, or oftentimes in the Maple business, volunteers. You interact with customers. SAP businesses are built on business-to-business relationships with SAP buyers, with suppliers, with equipment dealers, and all these relationships must be established and maintained. There are tools at maplemanager.org to understand the important consideration of these relationships and to formalize these relationships. Size of your operation is a consideration. Smaller operations with less at stake may operate more on handshake deals, whereas larger businesses may want the security of more formal contractual relationships. I sell all my sap on a handshake, and I try to negotiate prices before the season starts. So once we've found some trees and we've assessed them, now we need to find and develop our markets. As mentioned, selling sap is a B2B business, meaning that your buyers are other businesses. Finding these buyers, developing market access is of primary importance. As identified on our assessment tool, you start by contacting all processors within trucking distance of your sugar bush. Likely, these are the most important relationships to maintain. Buyers are going to want to know that you can produce good sap, and they may reject poor quality or low sugar content sap. Look for processors who utilize reverse osmosis. They're going to be able to process more sap and sap with lower sugar content. Once buyers are identified, negotiating sales is paramount, because when the sap flows, you need to have it delivered or picked up timely before quality degrades. Pricing needs to consider who is transporting the sap. There are many resources on pricing sap. From the Bascom's price sheet, Bascom's is a big purchaser here in New England. They're in New Hampshire. To the Ohio calculator, lots of info on pricing SAP is available. And this is great, and it highlights the most important factor in pricing. And that's that there is no set price for SAP. You must agree on pricing with your buyer based on both of your needs. Therefore, it's essential that you know your costs. And I came across a great quote from Mike Farrell here, who is a researcher, was a researcher with Cornell. And he says, the person selling SAP will have a greater incentive to gather and deliver more SAP, and more people will be enticed to get into the SAP selling business when both the person selling SAP and the person buying or processing SAP can earn a reasonable return by collaborating. This is a win-win for everyone. And that points to the importance of knowing your costs, because you want to make enough money and know where your costs are so that you can negotiate those prices reasonably and fairly with your buyers. Another important element of pricing and selling is delivery costs. To assist in analyzing these costs on a per load basis, we developed the SAP Hall Profit Calculator. This tool is useful on a micro level, looking at the potential profit of selling SAP on a load-by-load basis, and it can help you decide when delivery is no longer profitable. This calculator is found at Maple Manager, and I'm going to go in here, and we're going to look at this as well. So it's a pretty simple calculator here. We've got 4 steps. First off, put the name of your operation in there. I live on the side of Terrible Mountain, and all my trees are on Terrible Mountain, so I call it Terrible Mountain Maple. Here's the price received per gallon. We talked about this. We've got 2 SAP pricing guides linked here to help you out. The first one here that we'll look at are these cards. And we have bulk prices of syrup across the top on this card, and then sugar content here down the left-hand side. This is kind of, earlier, not super early in the season, but early enough that we're still getting nice sweet sap. And we're getting, we've negotiated our bulk price for this sap is at $2.30. And I think that says 36 cents. I got to get my glasses. Yep, 36 cents a gallon for that sap. So we're going to go back here. We're going to put in 36 cents. And then the size of the tank you're hauling with. My tank is not as big as the one on the truck on the slide that we were looking at. I've only got 320 gallons that I can haul. So that's a full load. The second step is putting in the price of your equipment that's involved in transporting sap. I've got a truck, costs me $25,000. I did have a loan on it, so I've got some interest that I need to pay. There's insurance costs for the truck. There's various fees, registration, inspection, repair costs, $2,500, and then annual maintenance, say $1,000 for brakes and tires. And then I use a pump. If you have a pump or 2, you can put those prices in here. I got this pump for $500. There's no interest, and there's no insurance, and there's no fees. It does require some repair work and or purchasing of fittings every year, and it's a gas-powered pump, so it needs some oil changes. And then, of course, you need a tank. My 320-gallon tank costs $600, I believe, and I didn't borrow money for it. I don't insure it. No fees associated. It doesn't usually break, but I do use a number of sap filters, so I just put that here in the repair. And then maintenance, again, there's always a fitting or 2, either for the tank or for some of the hoses. And then there's an option here if you have other equipment that you want to include. You click on this and you can enter other equipment, but I don't have that, so we won't use that. Next page is the delivery. So here, last year when I was doing this, gas prices were down under $2 a gallon. Now they're right around $3 a gallon. Round trip mileage, 20 miles here gets me to Londonderry and back, which is Jim and Josie's Sugar House where I deliver sap. My truck gets, I guess on a good day we can get 10 miles per gallon, especially with it loaded. I drive about 5,000 miles a year, and of those, about 1,000 of them are Maple miles. And what this is figuring out is all the costs associated with the truck and the equipment, and then the specific trip. And then our final step here is to look at labor. I put $22 in here. If you're paying taxes or any benefits or anything like that, that's equals somewhere around maybe $16 an hour to the employee and or yourself. And even if you're doing this driving yourself, which I do, you want to have a value in here because you want to value your time. And then I can load the truck pretty quickly. Takes about 15 minutes to load it, sometimes a little quicker, depending on how the pump is working. It's 10 minutes to Londonderry. Takes about 10 minutes to unload. And then another 10 minutes or so to get home. There, submit the information, and we get a nice report here. And this lists out your fixed expenses and your variable expenses. It takes out the part that's just for Maple. These are your equipment expenses, but you don't use the truck entirely for Maple. And so it splits that out, and then it can give you a fixed cost per load. And you can also get a sense of how much it's costing per mile. And then similar thing here with your variable expenses. Your equipment, the part that is associated with Maple. And at the bottom, it nets it all out. Here's the value of this load, $115. Typically for me, a tank of sap is worth something like $100. So the costs are 57 and you got 57 profit. So that's a good load. Now I want to go back and we'll do a revision on this and see how this can help you decide when maybe you shouldn't be delivering a load. Now let's say that the season is towards the end, the sap isn't as good, and we're getting 20 cents a gallon for it after we looked on our sap pricing guide. And I can't collect together a whole load. You know, the trees don't always give me a whole tank full of sap. And so this load only has 200 gallons in it. And we'll just change those things. Everything else is staying the same. And we'll submit that. And we can see that suddenly we're looking at losing money on that load. And even if we were paying ourselves this $16 and thinking we're making a little money there because we're selling, paying ourselves, we're still losing money. So that's how this tool can help you decide when it makes sense to deliver sap and when you can stop. It also can help you estimate how many loads you might have and what your ultimate productive potential is. So that's over there at maplemanagement.org. It's a great resource. And I've got a little computer glitch here. Okay, I just solved it. All right. So now I can take some more questions if we had any on that material that we just covered.
Yeah, Chris, this is Mark. I'm going to read a couple off the chat box here. And folks, feel free to type in more. I think for ease of IT here, I'm not going to unlock people's microphones until we get to the end. I think it'll be smoother that way. So type them in if you've got them, and then we will open up mics later. Chris, here's a question. Can you go over some methods used to estimate capacity or volume of a lot? I'm assuming that's a wood lot or sugar bush.
Yeah, and so that's where the assessment I was getting at, and we're going to look at that in a little detail next. So that's a good leading question. But once you determine, the average number of taps that you have per acre in your lot, and then the number of acres in that lot, you can get a sense of the total taps, and then based on that, as I mentioned kind of quickly, and we're going to look at it in a little more detail, you can kind of expect somewhere between 10 gallons to 20 gallons of sap per tap annually. And that ends up to be a syrup equivalent of around a quart per tap to a half a gallon per tap, which is the range that we see in the benchmark. Does that answer the question? That's kind of a quick, dirty way to get an estimation of how much sap that sugar bush can potentially produce. And there's a lot of factors in there. Not every sugar bush can, reach that top number of a half a gallon per tap.
Yeah, and Chris, I'll just put a plug in before I read this next question. That is I think a reasonable way to approach it, quick and dirty. And for folks that are interested, 2 weeks ago, Mark Iselhart, our extension specialist here, did a webinar just like this on the specific sugar bush inventory methods, forestry methods for assessing the lot. Our video will be posted probably the next week or two on that session if you go back to the website. And then as Chris said, and once you get your taps per acre and you can come up with a kind of a basic yield estimate, you can do those factors. Chris, I'm going to read one more here. Dave asks, on average, what is the maximum number of taps one person could handle in a sap selling business?
Well, that's a great question. It depends on how energetic you are and how much time that you have to devote to it. So I do this part-time. I can pretty easily handle the 700 taps that I have. I can get out there and tap them, pretty lazily in a couple of days. I'm looking to try to expand up to around 1,000 taps. I think I'll be able to handle that. I think that if you were, working at it full time, at least during the season, you could handle. I don't know. I guess I'm going to kind of throw a number out there that seems good, and I'm curious if anyone, Mark, if you or anyone else has any thoughts. But I think you could probably handle 4,000 or 5,000 taps. Now, again, the reason for that assessment sheet is it's going to depend on so many factors. What's the lay of the land? Is it really steep? Can you get motorized equipment in there, like tracked four-wheelers to help you or not? Is it wet? How easy is to move around? What's your trail network like? So there's a lot of things that will influence that and make it easier to handle more taps or fewer taps. And there also, you can invest in better trail networks. You can invest in better collection systems as well. Once you have your system set up, if all things are working good and your sap can come to a central location, it's easier to handle, but you still need to be able to get out there and fix things that go wrong, because that's what happens. Things always go wrong. Lines are always breaking. You got to find leaks, and you need to be able to get throughout the sugar bush. So I think 4,000 or 5,000 taps could be handled pretty easily.
Chris, I'll just chime in. We got a comment from Brian here in the chat box also saying he does 8,500 taps, and okay. I do 8,500 myself, and it works pretty well. And while you keep presenting, I'll go back to those numbers, because you did a presentation in Middlebury a couple of years ago where we had actually broken down some hourlies, and if I can find them, I'll try to gather them before the session closes out.
Yeah, we're going to look at that a little bit next.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if we have quite the same detail or not, but
okay. Well, I'll hold on that, and so I'll let you keep going, Chris. That's it for the chat box, and just about 7:45 here to give you a gauge on time.
Okay, I think we're doing pretty good. Okay, so now we're going to look at some SAP business models, get at some of those questions you're asking. So a business model allows you to look at your potential profitability and production prior to jumping in head first. If you already have jumped in, a business model analysis can help identify bottlenecks or other problems around profitability. A basic business model must identify a woods resource a method for generating cash, whether it's selling sap for cash or trading the syrup and selling the syrup, or some combination of both, and an estimation of costs and expenses with attention to key expenses for startup and operations. Of course, as SAP entrepreneurs, you're going to come up with innovative solutions, and that's going to help you figure out what your business model is. Compared to full production, SAP only is less risky, lower barriers to entry, and lower ongoing expenses. So now let's look at some numbers. The figures that we're going to look at have come from the UVM Maple Benchmark Project's 7 years of research. In that time, we've collected detailed financial data, cost of production data from over 50 maple businesses. From this, we've developed useful metrics for planning purposes, and we've mined this data to better understand the economics of the woods part of the operation. And that's helped develop these business models. As discussed, there's many ways to price sap, but generally it takes 40 gallons of 2% sap to make a gallon of syrup. Given bulk prices somewhere around $2.25, remember that the bulk prices set the value of your sap, and a 50 to 60% share of that going to the sap producer makes a gallon of sap worth something around 30 cents. Ranges of sap production above equate to about a quart, or 2 3/4 pounds of syrup equivalent per tap, to a half a gallon or 5.5 pounds of syrup equivalent per tap. This table shows the range of cash that could be generated given differing levels of productivity in the woods. This helps us answer, what's the productive potential of the land, and is it enough to make a go of it? These numbers are coarse. You'll need to refine them for the woods that you're looking at. So although the trees do a lot of work for us, we still need to get involved. And the primary resource after trees is our labor, production labor. Usually much of this labor is done by the owner, by you. This is a major expense of your operation, whether you pay yourself or not. If you do not pay yourself, it must be considered as a non-cash expense. Generally, owners do put in sweat equity to ease cash flow, but a good business model must consider the owner labor. And here's what Mark was talking about. Our benchmark shows that it takes about 1/10 of an hour per tap, and these are the ongoing woods expenses during the season, not the install. Here's a breakdown of 100 hours for 1,000 taps, 500 hours for 500 taps, and the equivalent labor expenses. So if you net these amounts out of your potential revenue generation up top, you get these ranges of remainder for operations and investment. Now, these labor estimates do not include business management or delivery, but you can see from this spread that there is profit potential in efficient, productive operations, and there is economies in scale. These remainder figures are estimates of cash available for operations and investments. This simple model shows why productive taps are a must for a commercially viable SAP enterprise. Producing a quality SAP and delivering it timely takes ongoing work and investment. So now let's look at some of the investments. From simple non-powered 3/16-inch setup to a remote generator-driven system, startup investment can vary widely. But no matter the system, a collecting and processing operation requires higher investment than SAP only, up to 2 times as much. And these numbers, again, come from our benchmark work. And here on the left, these are integrated operations. And when we looked at wood setup, we had an average of somewhere around 30 cents per tap. So these show an average investment of about $30 per tap. Crudely depreciate this over 10 years, and you have about $3 per tap per year in depreciation expense. This is a lower cost of entry than getting into a fully integrated processing operation. And let's end with land, forest land, and access to maple trees. There's a wide range shown here with maple sap finances. Therefore, selecting a good site and utilizing good forest management and sound business management in tandem is necessary to ensure a sustainably viable sap business. How long do we want to capture this investment in land? Let's say 10 years, and this is the example you're looking at, you're adding another $1.20 to $2.40 per tap a year. You could also rent taps. In Vermont, lease rates range from about 50 cents to $3, with the highest lease rates in areas with great competition for SAP. However, in Vermont, the statewide average is about $1.20 per tap, and that's a good number for renting taps in Vermont. I don't know what it is in other places. So if you've been penciling along with this, you'll see that of the $1 to $4 per tap remaining, a couple slides back, after labor, most of it's going to be invested. Expenses will eat up more. This is why most small businesses contribute their sweat to capitalize the business, or what's known as sweat equity, with much of labor expense allocation going to secure land and investment capital. So will your SAP enterprise be profitable? To answer this question, the first place to start is with that assessment of your potential SAP source and how it fits with your business opportunity, vision, and goals. This assessment will help identify business risks to mitigate, and importantly, your operations' competitive advantages. Use this assessment tool. We'll send information out about this after tonight's presentation. And we all come to this industry from different directions, and we each bring our unique strengths to our business position. There's not always a path to profitability, but planning will identify opportunity and risk, helping you chart a course for success. And coming are more business and woods management resources for SAP businesses. This is a new project that we'll be embarking on next month, looking at environmental and economic benefits from SAP business promotion. And here we're looking at combining forest management for carbon with SAP production. Look at working forests for supporting economic development and environmental improvement. For this project, we are going to create more resources, more tools. We're going to add to maplemanager.org a bunch of information and tools for SAP businesses. And that's it. So thanks all for tuning in tonight. Thanks to the benchmark and to survey participants. All this work helps us better understand how to support a growing maple industry with resources, tools, and education. So as I mentioned before, please be in touch if you want to be involved in our new SAP business project. Also, you can follow us on Facebook. We just got a Facebook page going. Not exactly sure when you got that going, Mark, but I went there and visited, and it'd be great to get some more followers. I can now take any more questions that we might have.
That's great, Chris. Nice job, and a lot of good information there, both the mathematics side of checking profitability, and then certainly the business relationships and how to manage both, I guess we'll call it negotiation and cooperation. I'm going to read one chat box here, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to hit a button that will enable people. You should be able to unmute yourselves in a second, so if you do want to speak out, you can. I think you're going to just have to go into your ribbon there and unmute yourself manually, but you should have the power to do that. And Chris, while we're waiting, I do have one comment here. Is the benchmark available to the general public?
Yeah, we've produced benchmark reports for several years. I don't know exactly where do we find those, Mark? Are they at maplemanager.org?
Yeah, I can put a link in there. I was just actually working on a link right now for the SAP or the checklist sheet that Chris showed. I'm going to put that in the chat box with a hyperlink. It is at www.maplemanager.org, but that's our kind of shortened link. So you're going to see the long one. I'll put in the benchmark link as well. This will bring you to, this will bring you to the Maple Resource Library at that website, and there's a number of documents on there, so you can scroll that sheet and find your find your info.
We have those benchmark reports, I think, going back to 2014, maybe. Is that?
Sounds about right. Well, we'll take a second here. I think I see some typing going on, and we'll wait for stuff to come in. Like I said, if anyone wants to ask a question out loud, you can unmute yourself up on the top ribbon, find the microphone, and it should be clicked off. You can click it back on.
Hey, Chris, I have a quick question for you, and thanks for that presentation. Say you have a tree that could accept 2 taps. Would it be safe to multiply everything by 2, or is it doesn't correlate that way? It's a fraction of that.
Well, I think part of that resource assessment and the presentation that Mark Isselhart did, I'm sure goes into this in more detail, but the diameter of the tree will determine the number of taps that you can put in it. So an important part of your sampling is not just counting trees, but it's looking at the size of those trees and then estimating the number of taps that those trees will take. So that happens during sampling. So if you have a very, even-aged sugar bush, and all the trees are more or less the same size, you could count the trees and then double the taps, but that's unusual. You're going to have a mix of trees. Usually you're going to have maples, hopefully, that are coming along that you're not going to tap. You're going to wait a few years for. Then you're going to have some maples that'll take a single tap and then some that will take 2. Does that help get at your question?
Yes, thank you. But so yield-wise, say a tree is big enough to accept 2 taps. Is the yield truly double than tapping it only once, or it's not it doesn't work that way?
Well, that's a great question, and there's actually not a simple answer to that. It depends somewhat on your vacuum, your collection system. So whether it's buckets, whether it's high vacuum. With the new super high vacuum systems, I've heard, and I haven't read a lot about this, that you don't necessarily get double production just from adding a second tap. There's actually some producers who won't even put 2 taps in when they have that high volume on their high vacuum on their sugar bush, because they don't think that the trade-off between damage to the tree as far as creating that non-conductive wood and increased sap, they don't think is worth it. So I think there's probably a bunch of research out there, but the simple answer is you're not necessarily going to double your production just by doubling your tap holes.
Great, thank you.
Chris, I'll read one came in. Is the bulk price for syrup available somewhere?
Well, it's different depending on the buyers. You need to find the bulk buyers who are in your area. I mentioned Bascom's around here. They do usually put out there what their bulk prices are, as do a lot of other buyers. Oftentimes, their pricing is built around what the Canadians set as their price. So a good place to look is at the Canadians, and I don't know that website, but they do publish what their pricing is going to be, and then of course you need to take that price and do a currency exchange on it to get to American dollars if you're in the United States. But different buyers will have different prices out there, especially this year. This year, at least in the Northeast, was a very poor year, and so the bulk prices they were higher than normal, and there was a wider variety between buyers, at least what I noticed. Some buyers were offering more than other buyers. It wasn't a typical year. Any more questions? Looks like Mark might have froze up. So there is a question just came in. Would you consider doing your own RO system? And my answer to that is I wouldn't, because I don't know. You mean in what you're getting at is doing RO to the sap and then delivering concentrate. I don't have enough taps to make that worthwhile. There are some people who I have heard are doing that. You'd have to have a fairly big sugar bush. There's actually an operation going in the town that I live in that is going to have a lot of taps, and they're delivering that sap a pretty good distance. So I'm suspecting that they might be putting in reverse osmosis machines there. And if you have a big enough operation, it could be worthwhile to do that. But that's something else, that you'd have to dig into when you're doing your planning. But I think that was a similar question from both Ross and Paul. Now, it looks like we did lose Mark. He usually wraps these things up, but we are at 8 o'clock, and if we don't have any more questions, I guess we can wrap it up. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight, and I look forward. There we go. I just got a message from Mark saying he just lost his signal. So I look forward to doing more work on SAP businesses, and hopefully you all or some of you will get involved in our upcoming projects. So don't forget to go to Facebook and to stay at check out maplemanager.org. That's where we'll be producing much more tools and information for you all.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. Have a good night.